Alternative ending: reincarnation of the strongest sword god. Chapter 21 Arrogant Shi Feng. Jinhai City, the top floor of Heilong Tower. Heilong Tower was one of the tallest buildings located in the central business district of Jinhai City. It also served as the Lanhua Group's trademark building. Meanwhile, the room located on Heilong Tower's top floor was a luxurious room that granted one an uninterrupted view of Jinhai City. However, at this moment, even though there were only 2 people inside this room, the atmosphere in the room was incredibly tense. Of the 2 people in the room, the one standing was Luo Tiancheng, while the one sitting on the luxurious leather sofa was a solemn man in his mid-30s. "What did you say?" Lan Heilong asked rhetorically, his cold voice sending shivers down Luo Tiancheng's spine. "Are you trying to tell me that not only did Shi Feng refuse my kindness, but he even had you convey to me the word scram?" The identity of the solemn man was none other than Lan Heilong, the true wielder of authority behind the Shadow Guild and the Lanhua Group. He was also the legendary individual who had climbed to the top of Jinhai City by relying on his great business acumen in investing all of the Lanhua Group's available resources into tackling God's domain since the game's launch and continuously expanding Shadow's influence in God's domain. "All of my words are true, Chief Lan. I even have a complete recording of Shi Feng's words here," Luo Tiancheng hurriedly said. He was incredibly arrogant back then. He showed no regard for Shadow at all. "I wanted nothing more than to teach him a lesson on the spot." Raising an eyebrow at Luo Tiancheng, Lan Heilong asked, "Why didn't you take action, then?" An awkward expression suddenly appeared on Luo Tiancheng's face as he said, "That's the God's Domain Academy we're talking about, Chief Lan. There are many people there. Although I have a much stronger physique than Shi Feng, I won't be able to do any serious damage to him within a short time. Rather than teaching a lesson, he might end up using the fight as an excuse to file a complaint." "Enough with the excuses," Lan Heilong said, stopping Luo Tiancheng in his tracks. "Do you think I'm not aware that you're no match for Shi Feng? You might have a stronger physique, but his combat experience far surpasses yours. You'd be fortunate if you could fight him to a draw, let alone teach him a lesson." Hearing Lan Heilong's words, Luo Tiancheng dared not continue making excuses for himself and simply accepted Lan Heilong's harsh criticism. What Lan Heilong said was true, after all. No matter how weak Shi Feng was in the past, he was still the guild leader of Shadow. Thanks to his high status, he had gotten many opportunities to spar with master-level martial artists. He could easily overcome the small difference in physique with the wealth of combat experience he had accumulated over the past decade. "Chief Lan, should I find an opportunity to go and take care of him with Brother Hu?" Luo Tiancheng suggested. The brother who Luo Tiancheng mentioned was Zhou Yahu, the deputy chief instructor of Shadow's training center. Although Zhou Yahu didn't possess much skill in God's domain, he had not stopped training his body in the real world for even a day throughout the past decade. When it came to combat in the real world, he easily ranked within the top 5 of Shadow. However, Lan Heilong shook his head and dismissively said, "That won't be necessary. Shi Feng might pose a problem if he were 5 years younger, but his time is already over now. He won't be a threat to us even if we let him be." "Are we going to let him go just like that, Chief Lan?" Luo Tiancheng asked in an unreconciled tone. "You have no idea how arrogantly he acted at the time. He showed no respect to Shadow at all." "That's normal." Lan Heilong chuckled. "He now has an excellent student under his belt, so of course, he has the capital to be arrogant. Even that famous instructor Qi has directly contacted me for this student. It is already certain that Wu Lingling will surpass Wu Xiaoxiao in the future. She might even get recruited by a super guild in the future and surpass the golden generation brought up by Instructor Qi." Instructor Qi was one of the God's Domain Academy's senior instructors. He was an existence that even the executives of Jinhai City's various large guilds had to treat with respect. The reason for this was that several years ago, 2 of his students had successfully joined the Super Guild World Domination. Now, those two students had even become members of World Domination's middle management. Their positions were much more prestigious compared to Gu Yiren, Shadow's current guild leader. After all, Gu Yiren was merely one of the many geniuses nurtured by World Domination. He would have to first surpass his peers before he would have a chance at joining World Domination's middle management. It was precisely this reason that Instructor Qi held such prestigious status in the God's Domain Academy, and that Gu Yiren had assigned his younger cousin to become Instructor Qi apprentice. Now that Wu Lingling had shown herself to possess talent surpassing even her elder sister, it was entirely possible for her to join the middle management of a super guild in the future if she received proper training. At that time, Feng could rely on his connection with Wu Lingling to put pressure on Shadow. In front of a super guild, a second-rate guild like Shadow was nothing but an insignificant ant. If Shadow failed to handle the situation properly, it might even become history in God's domain. With such a powerful card in his hand, it'd be strange if Feng didn't behave arrogantly. It was also for this reason that Luo Tiancheng was incredibly envious of Feng. He couldn't understand how Feng could be so lucky to acquire a student like Wu Lingling. However, Feng won't be able to stay arrogant for very long, Lan Hailong said, smiling. A good student is all that he has. If this good student ceases to be his student, he will know how laughable his behavior today is. Chief Lan, don't tell me you're planning on using that slot. Luo Tiancheng asked as he suddenly thought of something. Yes. Lan Hailong nodded. While the legacies in those special dungeons are valuable, they're worth nothing if we don't have the necessary talent to make use of them. Rather than waste our legacy slot on an ordinary genius, it'd be much better if we use it to win over Wu Lingling. With our legacy slot and the benefits Instructor Qi offered, Wu Lingling will definitely choose to go under Instructor Qi so long as she isn't a fool. Leave it to you to come up with such a brilliant plan, Chief Lan. If Feng finds out about this, he'll definitely regret the words he said today. Luo Tiancheng said. He couldn't help but laugh when he thought back to Feng's arrogant behavior before. According to the various large guilds' investigations, there were special dungeons located throughout the miniature ancient world. Meanwhile, these dungeons were 1,000 man-team dungeons that had never been seen on the main continent before. However, the huge entrance limit and 1-week cooldown of these dungeons wasn't what made them special. Instead, what made them special was the ancient legacies they dropped. By using these ancient legacies, players would get to inherit crucial information about their respective classes, which would, in turn, increase their chances of advancing to higher tiers in the future. Although nobody knew how much improvement these ancient legacies could provide as of yet, even a tiny improvement would make invaluable items. After all, one would typically have to rely on luck to encounter items and events that improved one's chances of ascending to a higher tier. However, raiding these special dungeons was easier said than done. Apart from gathering 1,000 experts, one would also need to make sure that the gathered experts were sufficiently skilled. At the very least, these experts needed to be capable of reaching the late stage of the trial tower's 6th floor. With such stringent requirements, even Shadow, a second-rate guild, could only form one such team. It'd be impossible for an independent player like Feng to form such a team. Alright, that's it for today. After you return, make sure you find an opportunity to make contact with Wu Lingling, Lan Hailong said. Remember to be quick. Wu Xiaoxiao is still out training with her instructor right now, so she shouldn't be aware of her sister's talent yet. Leave it to me, Chief Lan. Luo Tiancheng said confidently. Immediately afterward, Luo Tiancheng left Hai Long Tower and hurried back to the God's Domain Academy. Meanwhile, inside the miniature ancient world, Feng and his students had finally finished resting and organizing themselves in the Withered Ruins outer region. After seeing that all of his students had recovered, Feng nodded and said, "All right, time to head inside." Chapter 22 Primordial Archaic Species. Withered Ruins Inner Region. Upon entering the inner region, Feng and his students were greeted by a street lined with dilapidated buildings covered in trees and vines. A strong stench of blood also filled the air, the stench originating from the numerous half-orc corpses that covered the street. Amazing! I can't believe Soulfire managed to clear out so many high lords and great lords, Qin Wuchen exclaimed when he saw the corpses covering the dilapidated street. Even at a glance, he could tell that over 10,000 fresh monster corpses covered the street. Meanwhile, every one of these demonized half-orcs was a level 105 high lord or above. Yet, Soulfire's members had managed to defeat all of these demonized half-orcs with just a team of 200. Even if one searched through the entire 100 Flow City, one was unlikely to find more than a handful of such teams. Standing beside Qin Wuchen, Wu Lingling nodded her head in shock. Then, she sighed in relief and said, "Thankfully, we didn't come in before them. Otherwise, we might not even get the chance to escape if we have to face so many demonized half-orcs." The other students on the team also nodded in agreement. Before entering the inner region, everyone was excited to finally grind in the inner region. After all, only a few teams from 100 Flow City could grind in the Withered Ruins inner region. Any team that could grind here would all be made up of top-tier experts. If their team could grind here as well, they would gain a lot of bragging rights among their peers at school. However, after seeing the large number of half-orc corpses littering the street before them, they couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. Although they had already made significant improvements in their combat standards after grinding in the outer region, those improvements were nowhere near enough to help them survive in the inner region. The difference between the Withered Ruins inner and outer regions was simply too massive. In the outer region, even the biggest group they faced only had 400 or 500 demonized half-orcs. The number of great lords in these groups was also few and far between. However, judging by the massacre before them, the inner region's monsters should move in groups of thousands or more. Moreover, each group should have hundreds of great lords and even several dozen grand lords. It should be known that players who entered the miniature ancient world would have their basic attributes suppressed. Currently, even Tier 3 experts had difficulty facing great lords in a one-on-one situation. As for grand lords, a party of 6 experts would be needed to deal with one at the very minimum. Yet, just one group of monsters in the Withered Ruins inner region had several dozen grand lords. If all of these grand lords attacked together, even a 1,000-man expert team of the same level would face annihilation if they weren't careful, let alone their small team of 31 players. At this time, Xiao Yuheng, a girl with long golden hair and long pointed ears, suggested to Feng, "Instructor Shi, how about we go back to the outer region and grind there? The inner region is far too dangerous for our team to deal with." Xiao Yuheng's combat power ranked among the top 5 of Feng's students. Upon hearing her suggestion, the other students promptly nodded their heads in agreement. While Feng's monodomain allowed him to toy with Great Lord-ranked demonized half-orcs previously, the present situation was different. The scale of the monsters was simply too great. With how many monsters there were, it wouldn't matter even if Feng's monodomain could weaken them. These monsters would still trample over their team easily. Meanwhile, Feng wasn't surprised by his students' reactions. Any normal player would make such a judgment. Chuckling, he said, "What you say is correct. This place is no longer suitable for you to grind in. With your current strength, even the smallest monster group here would annihilate us. But who said that we were here to grind?" Feng's words instantly stunned everyone present. "Did we not come to the Withered Ruins to grind, Instructor Shi?" Wu Lingling curiously asked. Others might not know it, but Wu Lingling knew that Feng had an agreement with Mysterious Moon's Zhou Yalin. For the sake of acquiring the Dark Moon Outpost's resources, Feng had promised to bring 30 experts to help Mysterious Moon in contesting for the outpost. Meanwhile, Feng's so-called experts were none other than his students. If they didn't quickly raise their levels right now, they would be making a fool of themselves once it was time to compete for the Dark Moon Outpost. They might even become enemies with Mysterious Moon. After all, Mysterious Moon had placed significant importance on the Dark Moon outpost. It was also the guild's first step in contending for the miniature ancient world's resources. The guild couldn't allow any mistakes to happen. In response to Wu Lingling's question, Feng put on a serious face and said, "That's right. We have already done enough grinding in the outer region. Our goal in entering the inner region now isn't to level up, but to improve our equipment instead. Our leveling speed will be greatly affected if we don't have adequate weapons and equipment." However, despite seeing the logic in Feng's words, everyone couldn't help but be rendered speechless. If they couldn't even beat the inner region's monsters, how could they improve their weapons and equipment? "Don't worry and just follow me. Looking at the battle traces, they shouldn't have moved too far away from us," Feng said, chuckling when he saw everyone's exasperated expressions. Then, he turned around and started marching down the dilapidated street, making his way toward the city's center. Meanwhile, Wu Lingling and the others couldn't help but turn to look at each other, none of them able to make sense of their instructor's words. In a situation where they couldn't even beat the monsters they faced, how were they supposed to improve their weapons and equipment? After Wu Lingling and the others followed Feng through the corpse-laden streets for half an hour, they spotted a group of people gathered in front of a ruined plaza some distance ahead. Meanwhile, these people were none other than Southern Tiger and the other members of Soul Fire. At this time, though, Southern Tiger and his teammates all bore somber expressions on their faces. Then, when Wu Lingling and the others arrived at the ruined plaza, they couldn't help but gasp in shock. "A fallen angel? How can this be?" Previously, due to the obstructions around the plaza, Wu Lingling and the others had failed to notice anything strange about the plaza. However, after arriving at the plaza's edge, their eyes were immediately attracted to the strange woman standing quietly in the plaza's center. Specifically, they were attracted by the 3 pairs of pitch-black wings on this woman's back. Meanwhile, this winged woman was none other than a fallen angel, a legendary existence capable of rivaling dragons. In God's domain, dragons were synonymous with natural disasters. They could single-handedly destroy entire kingdoms, and even experts at the peak of Tier 5 would have trouble holding their ground against one. Now that an existence capable of rivaling the mighty dragons had appeared in this place, how could everyone not be frightened? "No, she's not a fallen angel," Feng said, shaking his head. "She's not?" Wu Lingling asked. Then, after taking a closer look at the woman quietly standing in the middle of the plaza, she continued, "But her appearance is similar to the fallen angels I've seen in books and video records." After Wu Lingling posed her question, a deep voice suddenly entered everyone's ears. "He's right. She is indeed not a fallen angel." Upon hearing this voice, Wu Lingling and the other students promptly turned to its source. Then, they couldn't help but be surprised when they saw a middle-aged man wearing silvery grey heavy armor and carrying 2 shields walking over to them. After all, the middle-aged man who spoke was none other than Southern Tiger, one of Soul Fire's 16 captains and a mighty expert in God's domain. Seeing the surprised look on the faces of Wu Lingling and the others, Southern Tiger smiled and said, "If you don't believe me, you can check using an identification skill." Upon hearing Southern Tiger's reminder, Wu Lingling and the others promptly used their identification skills on the distant woman. Tyrion, Realm Lord, Primordial Archaic Species, Mythic. Level 106. HP 6 billion. When everyone saw the strange woman's stats, they finally understood that the strange woman was indeed not a fallen angel. Even so, they still couldn't help but gasp when they saw the strange woman's stats. These stats far surpassed what an ordinary Tier 4 mythic monster possessed. After seeing the looks of shock on Wu Lingling and the others, Southern Tiger shrugged and said, "Although she isn't a fallen angel, her strength is unquestionable. It is virtually impossible to kill her at this stage of the game." Tyrion's 6 billion HP and corresponding battle recovery were already more than enough to give current teams in the miniature ancient world a huge headache, let alone Tyrion's other attributes. Hearing Southern Tiger's words, the other members of Soul Fire couldn't help but reveal bitter smiles. Originally, they thought their team could become the first team to reap the Withered Ruins' pioneering benefits. Never did they expect to meet such a troublesome existence here. Friend, if you are thinking of sneaking the purple gold treasure chest behind her, I advise you to give up, Southern Tiger said when he noticed Feng staring at the treasure chest situated behind the Realm Lord. Smiling, he explained, that treasure chest's defensive magic array is tied with the boss. You can't get the treasure chest if you don't kill the boss. The purple gold treasure chest behind Tyrion naturally tempted Southern Tiger. However, after attempting to acquire it a few times, he found that the treasure chest's defensive magic array was linked with the boss's HP. So long as the boss remained alive, the defensive magic array would have an inexhaustible supply of energy powering it. Thus, his previous attempts to distract the boss and steal the treasure chest ended up failing. Just when Southern Tiger was trying to further dissuade Feng from giving up on the treasure chest, Feng suddenly said, "Just kill the boss and take the treasure chest, then." Chapter 23 Tier 3 Sword King? Feng's words rendered Southern Tiger speechless. As for Moon Rain, who stood nearby, she rolled her eyes and cast a scornful gaze at Feng, her eyes seemingly saying, "Thank you for stating the obvious. Friend, it's not that we don't want to kill the boss. It's just that this boss simply isn't something we can kill at this stage of the game. We'll need at least a Tier 4 MT to tank it," Southern Tiger patiently explained. "Moreover, even if we do have a Tier 4 MT to keep the boss distracted right now, it'll still be very challenging to kill this boss with our current DPS." The other members of Soul Fire repeatedly nodded to Southern Tiger's words. Every Soul Fire member present was a veteran player who had played God's Domain for at least 7 years, so they couldn't be more familiar with the strategies used to hunt wild bosses. While it might seem like players could raid any bosses so long as they could survive the boss's attacks, that wasn't entirely true. An example of an exception would be Tyrion. Despite being a level 100 mythic boss, it had HP surpassing even level 130 mythic bosses. It was no exaggeration to say that Tyrion had the highest HP out of all the level 100 mythic bosses they had seen thus far. Meanwhile, with this much HP, Tyrion could recover 120 million HP every 5 seconds simply by relying on its 2% battle recovery. If a team was incapable of outputting at least 24 million damage per second, it'd be impossible to defeat Tyrion. However, it should be known that due to the miniature ancient world's restrictions, even the peak experts of super guilds could only bring a full set of level 100 epic equipment with them. They couldn't bring any fragmented legendary items or higher. With only epic weapons and equipment, a peak expert would be fortunate to even cause 500,000 damage per second to an ordinary mythic monster, let alone a mythic monster with the Realm Lord title. Moreover, this DPS was calculated based on the assumption that the boss wouldn't dodge or block any attacks. After factoring in these situations, the realistic DPS would need to be halved or more. In other words, only if a 200-man team was composed entirely out of super guild level peak experts and fully geared in epic weapons and equipment would the team have a chance at killing Tyrion. Trying to raid Tyrion with anything less would be nothing but folly. After hearing Southern Tiger's explanation, Wu Lingling and the other students inwardly expressed their agreement as well. Although they were unfamiliar with raiding mythic bosses, they still knew that the current problem they faced wasn't a lack of combat standards. Instead, it was a matter of their lacking equipment standards and basic attributes. Tyrion simply wasn't a boss they could topple simply by having good techniques and strategies. Meanwhile, after hearing Southern Tiger's explanation, Feng also nodded in agreement. Then, he turned to look at Tyrion and said, "The concerns you've stated are indeed problematic. However, I have a special method to make up for our lacking DPS. The only problem is whether we have a sufficiently good MT to contain this boss. In God's Domain, Realm Lords were not existences that ordinary teams could challenge without having a significant advantage in levels. Firstly, it was because Realm Lords possessed great destructive power. Ordinary teams would have difficulty finding an expert capable of tanking a Realm Lord's powerful attacks. Secondly, it was because Realm Lords possessed astonishing HP and defense. These two factors combined were more than enough to deter any ordinary team from challenging a Realm Lord. However, these two factors still weren't the most crucial problem. Instead, what made Realm Lords tricky opponents was their mana domains. Not only could they gather dense mana to strengthen their defense, but they could also use this gathered mana to enhance their destructive power. Meanwhile, there were only two solutions to a Realm Lord's mana domain. The first solution was for players to have extraordinary basic attributes and destructive power. The second solution was to destroy the Realm Lord's mana domain, which would, in turn, reduce the Realm Lord's raid difficulty. Only, the latter of the two methods was much more difficult to achieve. Are you serious, friend? Do you really have a way to raid this boss? Southern Tiger eagerly asked when he heard Shi Feng's words. That's 6 billion HP we are talking about. Even a 1,000 man team of experts will have trouble toppling such an HP. As the Realm Lord of a level 100 Hell Mode regional dungeon, Tyrion was undoubtedly an invincible existence to the current players in the miniature ancient world. If they could successfully raid Tyrion, setting aside the potential rewards, just the fame they could obtain would instantly put them in the spotlight of the entire Hundred Flow City. At this time, even Moonrain couldn't help but take a second look at Shi Feng, her eyes filled with surprise and suspicion. Previously, when Southern Tiger told her that Shi Feng might be a great expert capable of rivaling Soulfire's honorary Elder Blue Smile, she had more or less been skeptical about his judgment. However, after hearing the words Shi Feng just uttered, she was certain that Shi Feng wasn't a mighty expert. After all, what Shi Feng had just said was simply ludicrous. Anyone with even a bit of knowledge regarding Realm Lords would find his words laughable. Rather than a powerful expert, Moonrain felt that Shi Feng was more likely to be a scammer. Now that people worldwide had already acknowledged God's domain as the second world for humans, the status players held in God's domain had become just as important as the status they held in the real world. Meanwhile, because of the Soulfire adventurer team standing in God's domain, countless people sought to befriend Soulfire's executives. Among these people, many would boast about their ability to accomplish amazing feats just to attract attention to themselves and create the illusion that they were powerful experts. However, when these people were asked to put their words into action, they would back away and start making all sorts of excuses for their inability. In Moonrain's opinion, Shi Feng was no different than these people. Thinking up to this point, Moonrain suddenly smiled and looked at Shi Feng, saying, "Since you think we can raid the boss, why don't we cooperate? We have many capable MTS here. So long as we can raid this boss, we'll split the loot 30:70. You'll take 70 while we'll take 30. You can treat it as us doing work for you. What do you think?" Upon hearing Moonrain's words, the other Soulfire members present couldn't help but look at her in confusion. Soulfire was a top adventurer team in God's domain. Typically, when Soulfire raided bosses for others, Soulfire would get at least half of the boss's loot. After all, raiding a boss came with significant risks. It was especially true for wild bosses. Even if players could get resurrected by healers, they would still lose a significant portion of their EXP. Thus, Soulfire's standard practice was to split the loot evenly with the employer. At most, the employer would have priority pick over the loot. Although their team was indeed desperate to raid Tyrion, giving away 70% of the boss's loot was still a little too much. After all, they had 200 players on their side, whereas Shi Feng only had 31 players on his side. Not to mention, 30 of these 31 players were students. Anyone could tell that their team would be the one doing the bulk of the work. However, despite their confusion, everyone on Soulfire's team simply kept their opinions to themselves. Moonrain was the team's second in command, after all. While the decision she made was a little surprising, it wasn't entirely unreasonable. In such a situation, even Southern Tiger couldn't casually refute her without offering a better solution. At this time, even Wu Lingling and the other students couldn't help but look at Moonrain in surprise. Although they were unfamiliar with raiding mythic bosses, they knew that employing the services of a top adventurer team like Soulfire shouldn't be so cheap. A 30:70 split with Soulfire taking the smaller share would be an unimaginable price in the outside world. Not to mention, Soulfire's services weren't something just anyone could ask for. One would typically have to put a hefty down payment to get Soulfire to move. Moreover, this down payment would not be returned regardless of the task's success. Yet, now, a team from Soulfire was taking the initiative to seek cooperation. It was simply unbelievable. Excited over this situation, Wu Lingling and the others turned to look at Feng with expectant gazes. "I'm sorry, but I cannot agree to your offer." Feng flatly rejected Moonrain's offer, contrary to everyone's expectations. Then, just when Moonrain was about to laugh and say something, Feng added, "A 30:70 split is too small. If we are to cooperate, it'll have to be a 10:90 split at the very least." A 10:90 split. Upon hearing Feng's words, Moonrain retracted her laughter and angrily glared at Feng. Then, in a sharp tone, she said, "Who do you think you are? On what basis are you asking for such a price? Why don't you rob us instead?" Meanwhile, just when the other Soulfire members were about to nod in agreement with Moonrain's words, Feng calmly said, "On the basis that I am a Tier 3 Sword King with a monodomain." Immediately after Feng finished speaking, space around Feng suddenly warped, and everyone from Soulfire felt their bodies becoming extremely heavy. Chapter 24 Beyond Epic. How is this possible? What a powerful monodomain! When Soulfire's members felt the frozen space and mist-like mana around them, they couldn't help but turn to look at Feng in shock. Moonrain, in particular, was utterly dumbfounded by this situation, the words she had originally prepared to say vanishing without a trace. Meanwhile, standing behind Feng, Wu Lingling and the others revealed faintly smug and prideful expressions on their faces. In God's domain, although players capable of casting monodomains weren't as rare as a phoenix's feather, they were still very rare existences. Typically, one would only start seeing players with monodomains more frequently after reaching Tier 5. Even then, only 1 or 2 out of 10 Tier 5 players would be capable of casting a monodomain. Moreover, most of them were magical class players. Meanwhile, Tier 5 players were apex existences in God's domain. They would be considered big hots even in the various super guilds. Thus, Feng's ability to cast a monodomain at Tier 3 was practically legendary in God's domain. According to rumors, only God's domain's Tier 6 God-ranked experts were capable of such a feat. "Miss Moon, may I know if I am qualified now?" Feng calmly asked as he looked at Moonrain's frozen expression. There was no hint of anger or print in his voice as he spoke. It sounded as if he was merely bringing up an insignificant matter. However, when Moonrain snapped out of her daze, she couldn't help but be at a loss for words, an embarrassed expression on her face. This was because Feng's words had put her in a bind. Even if she admitted that Feng was qualified, with her status as Southern Tiger's vice-captain, she did not have the authority to offer the 10:90 split price Feng was asking for. Yet, if she said that Feng was unqualified and her higher UPS learned of her actions, she would probably have to kiss her position as vice-captain goodbye. After all, an expert capable of casting a monodomain at Tier 3 was not an existence Soulfire would dare to casually offend. Just when Moonrain was contemplating how she should answer Feng, a thick voice rang in everyone's ears. "Yes. Of course you are qualified, Brother Black Flame," Southern Tiger said with a friendly smile on his face. "I can agree on Soulfire's behalf to cooperate with you, Brother Black Flame." "Captain." Moonrain was surprised when she heard Southern Tiger's words. This was definitely the first time since Soulfire's establishment that they had accepted a 10:90 split. Even when they partnered with a super guild previously, they had only offered the super guild a 20:80 split. Moreover, that was mainly because Soulfire only played a supporting role in the job. However, they were clearly going to be the main contributors to the Tyrian raid. They bore significant risk, yet all they would get for their efforts was merely 10% of the loot. If news of this spread, it would negatively affect the adventurer team's reputation. It wouldn't matter even if Feng was a tier 3 sword king who had a monodomain. It's fine. I know what I'm doing, Southern Tiger said, smiling. Have everyone get ready. I understand. Seeing Southern Tiger's expression, Moonrain had no choice but to prepare the team for the upcoming raid. Meanwhile, when Wu Lingling and the others saw this scene, they couldn't help but gape in shock. They actually agreed. I doubt even super guilds will get a 10:90 split in such a situation, right? Originally, Wu Lingling and the others felt that it was unlikely for Soulfire to accept Feng's absurd demand. After all, accepting a 10:90 split would be no different from working for free. It should be known that the average tier 4 mythic bosses would only drop around 30 to 40 items, with only 3 or 4 of these items being actually useful. If Soulfire gave Feng 90% of Tyrion's loot, Feng would be taking all of the best items dropped. As for the remaining items, even if they were valuable, they probably couldn't hold a candle for the best items. Rather than take on such a thankless job, Soulfire would be better off killing a weaker boss. Not only would Soulfire gain a bigger harvest, but the risk it had to take would also be smaller. It was also because of this reason that players would typically split the loot evenly when cooperating to take down a powerful boss. Depending on the strength of the participating forces, the loot division ratio might go down to 30:70. However, never would anyone accept a 10:90 split. While Wu Lingling and the other students were having a hushed discussion among themselves, Feng suddenly turned to Southern Tiger and said, "Since you have agreed to my request, can you give me command over the team afterward?" Upon hearing Feng's words, Wu Lingling and the others immediately started growing nervous again. A team's commanding rights were crucial to a team. Whoever held these rights held the life and death of everyone on the team. Hence, what Feng for was the right to manage the life and death of Soulfire's members. It might be fine under normal circumstances, but the various powers were desperately fighting to get a lead over each other in the miniature ancient world right now. If Southern Tiger's team ended up suffering a team wipe here, it would bring catastrophic to Soulfire. That won't be a problem, Southern Tiger said, nodding without hesitation. We'll leave everything to you, Brother Black Flame. Immediately after hearing Southern Tiger's response, Moonrain, who was issuing commands to the team, frowned and looked at Southern Tiger as if she was looking at a stranger. Eventually, unable to help herself, she quietly whispered to Southern Tiger, "Captain, isn't this a little too much? If he improperly commands us into a team wipe, whether intentionally or unintentionally, it'll ruin all of our plans in the miniature ancient world. Is this really worth it?" Soulfire had great ambitions for the miniature ancient world. Otherwise, the adventurer team wouldn't have sent Southern Tiger, a half-step tier 5 expert, into the miniature world and had him restart his progress from tier 3. Yet, now, not only was Southern Tiger having their team of experts take on great risk to work as free labor for Feng, but he was even handing over the rights to command the team to Feng. What Southern Tiger was doing was no different than gambling all of Soulfire's investments in the miniature ancient world on Feng. Yes. Southern Tiger firmly answered. Yes. Hearing Southern Tiger's answer, Moonrain couldn't help but take another look at Feng, a confused look appearing on her face. While it was indeed amazing for someone to be capable of casting a monodomain at tier 3, it wasn't so strange to see such people in the miniature ancient world. Anyone who was once an apex expert with a monodomain in the outside world could probably accomplish the same feat. After all, they were merely retraining their game characters. The experiences they had accumulated in the outside world remained. Meanwhile, seeing the confusion on his vice-captain's face, Southern Tiger smiled and whispered, "You might not know this since you haven't reached the Tier 5 threshold yet, but his monodomain is different from the pseudo-monodomains you've seen those legendary experts cast when they were at Tier 3. His is a complete monodomain." A complete monodomain? Moonrain grew even more confused. What's the difference? In her recognition, a monodomain was a monodomain. It was something that allowed players to take control over the mana in the area surrounding them. At most, monodomains would differ in terms of strength. She had never heard of there being fake monodomains. Seeing that Moonrain did not believe him, Southern Tiger helplessly shook his head and said, "Of course there is a difference. It isn't a matter of a monodomain being weak or strong. If players wish to cast a complete monodomain, they need to satisfy two conditions." "What conditions?" Moonrain asked curiously. "The first condition is to be a Grandmaster Magician," Southern Tiger said. Then, he turned to look at the distant Feng, a solemn expression appearing on his face as he continued, "The second condition is to construct a mana body beyond the epic rank at Tier 3. Chapter 25 Future Tier 6? His mana body has reached beyond the epic rank?" Moonrain was filled with an indescribable sense of shock when she heard Southern Tiger's explanation. Previously, in her opinion, Feng was merely a peak expert with some strength. Even if he could cast a monodomain at Tier 3, he should, at most, be a match for Soulfire's strongest combatant Blue Smile. While Feng indeed deserved Soulfire's respect for having such strength, he still wasn't at the level of being in existence Soulfire would fear. After all, Soulfire was one of the few top adventurer teams in God's domain. However, after hearing Southern Tiger's explanation, Feng's value in Moonrain's eyes changed drastically. Before the miniature ancient world's introduction, most players and powers were unaware that apart from bronze, silver, and gold, a higher rank known as epic existed for mana bodies. However, constructing an epic mana body at Tier 3 was nigh impossible, and even Tier 5 experts who had the opportunity to construct an epic mana body had failed to do so. Meanwhile, according to the various superpowers investigation, every expert who managed to construct an epic mana body had eventually grown to become a Tier 6 God-ranked expert without fail. Because of this, many powers and experts came to the miniature ancient world after its introduction into God's domain. Every one of these people was thinking of constructing an epic mana body and becoming a Tier 6 God-ranked expert in the future. However, constructing an epic mana body was easier said than done. Even Southern Tiger, someone who was once a half-step Tier 5 expert, had failed to construct an epic mana body and could only settle for a gold mana body. Yet, it was now revealed that Feng possessed an epic mana body. A future God-ranked expert, is it? When Moonrain looked at Feng slowly walking over to them, understanding and envy filled her eyes. Although Tier 6 God-ranked experts were regarded as God's domain's strongest combat power, most Tier 6 experts operated very secretively. Under normal circumstances, even Tier 5 experts had difficulty meeting a Tier 6 expert. As for other players, meeting a Tier 6 expert was no different than winning a lottery. Meanwhile, an independent expert who had the potential to become a Tier 6 God-ranked expert in the future was someone even super guilds would try to befriend, let alone Soulfire. Thus, Southern Tiger's previous behavior was completely reasonable. While Moonrain was immersed in her thoughts, Feng had also arrived before Southern Tiger and Moonrain. Looking at Feng, Southern Tiger smiled and asked, "Have you finished preparing on your side, Brother Black Flame?" "Yes." Feng nodded. Then, in a slightly awkward tone, he said, "All I'm missing now is the data of your members. Can I trouble you to show me everyone's data?" Honestly, even Feng wasn't 100% confident in taking down Tyrion. After all, the standard of his weapons, equipment, and skills was subpar at best. He was merely relying on his monodomain to weaken Tyrion and lower the raid difficulty. As for whether the raid could succeed, it would still depend on the team's overall standard. However, player data was private information. If someone had their player data exposed, it could potentially lead to them getting targeted by those with malicious intent. Hence, whether guild players or independent players, nobody would willingly share their player data unless they knew the other party could be trusted. As the commander for the upcoming raid, it was normal for Feng to ask for his team members' player data. However, to Soulfire's team, this was probably a very tall order to fulfill. This was also why player teams wouldn't casually pass command over the team to an outsider. However, as soon as Feng finished speaking, Moonrain suddenly handed Feng a list and said, "This is a general list of the weapons and equipment our team members have. I can also give you a list of their skills and spells if you need it." Upon receiving the list of data, Feng couldn't help but look at Moonrain in slight surprise. He failed to understand why this woman, who previously expressed mild disgust toward him, would suddenly behave so cooperatively. However, he quickly pushed this thought to the back of his head and calmly nodded, saying, "Thanks. This much is enough." As Feng read through the provided player data one after another, Southern Tiger asked in a slightly proud tone, "What do you think of our team's standard, Brother Black Flame?" Southern Tiger was relatively confident in the team he led. While his team might be inferior to the various super guilds' frontline teams, it was top tier when placed among the various first-rate guilds' frontline teams. "Not bad," Feng said, nodding. According to the list, apart from Southern Tiger and Moonrain, who were armed to the teeth with epic weapons and equipment, the other team members were mainly geared in epic weapons and equipment as well. Moreover, these epic items were all custom-made by players. They had much higher compatibility with their users than epic weapons and equipment obtained through killing monsters. Although there was also a small minority of players geared in level 100 Dark Gold equipment, the gear they used was an incredibly rare, custom-made 8-piece Dark Gold set equipment. The effect of such a set was much better than 8 pieces of randomly matched epic equipment. Soulfire's team was definitely ranked at the top in the current 100 Flow City. Only the various Super Guilds teams could possibly beat it. "I'm relieved that you think so," Southern Tiger said, smiling. "Everyone in the team has magic scrolls and attribute potions allocated to them already. I'll leave you with command over the team now, Brother Black Flame." Subsequently, after receiving the rights to command Soulfire's team, Feng started inviting Soulfire's members to his team. Meanwhile, when Wu Lingling and the others saw this scene, they couldn't help but be surprised and excited. "What? Instructor Shi is actually going to be commanding Soulfire's members. Instructor Shi is amazing. What kind of magic did he use? I doubt even our academy's dean can receive such treatment. Crap! Is this for real? Not only do we get to raid a boss with Soulfire's members, but our instructor will even be the one commanding the team? People from the other classes will definitely think I'm crazy if I tell them about this." Originally, everyone had already been greatly shocked by the strength Feng displayed. This was especially true for the students who were still worried about Feng's capabilities as an instructor. After all, Feng was a dismissed guild leader from Shadow. He had no background or resources in God's domain whatsoever. While it was true that he could teach them many combat techniques, God's domain was a world that revolved around resources. Only by having better resources could one have a better time developing in God's domain. This had long since become common knowledge in God's domain. However, Feng had now shown that not only could he teach them combat techniques, but he had also shown that he had the strength to attract the interest of major powers such as the Soulfire Adventurer team. With such strength, there was no way he couldn't earn a bunch of resources. Meanwhile, after Feng took charge of Soulfire's members, he quickly split the team's MTS across 9 parties, each party having 2 MTS and 4 healers. Once the raid began, these 9 tank parties would take turns tanking the boss. As for everyone else, Feng merely told them to attack with everything they've got. "Will everything really be alright, Captain?" Moonrain couldn't help but ask Southern Tiger after hearing Feng's strategy. Although she trusted Southern Tiger's judgment and understood that Feng was an expert who even super guilds would try to befriend, being a powerful expert and a capable commander were two entirely different things. Bosses at the mythic rank or above would possess a certain degree of intelligence. If the commander of a team was incapable of making the right decisions at the right time during a boss raid, it could easily lead to severe casualties and possibly even a team wipe. Against a realm lord like Tyrion, they would need at least 4 tier 3 MTS taking turns sharing the damage under normal circumstances. If they only sent 2 tier 3 MTS to tank Tyrion's attacks, even if these MTS didn't get one shot by the boss, the healers wouldn't be able to keep up with their healing. After all, the gap in basic attributes was too massive. Otherwise, they wouldn't have found it impossible to raid Tyrion previously. Probably. When Southern Tiger saw how Feng had arranged the team, he couldn't help but lose confidence in his judgment as well. While it was true that monodomains had a weakening effect against monsters, a monodomain cast by a tier 3 player should have very little effect against a realm lord like Tyrion. Even after being subjected to the effects of Feng's monodomain, Tyrion would still be too strong for just 2 tier 3 MTS to tank it. Probably. Moonrain was rendered speechless when she heard Southern Tiger's uncertain tone. They had truly gotten themselves into trouble this time. Now, they could only hope that the partnership this time would be enough to give Feng a good impression of soul fire. That way, they would have an easier time explaining themselves to the other captains. While Southern Tiger and Moonrain were discussing their chances of success, Feng said through the team chat, "All right, let's begin. First party, advance." Upon hearing Feng's command, the first party consisting of 2 level 100, Tier 3 Guardian Knights and their 4 accompanying healers promptly charged into the plaza. Then, as soon as the 2 Guardian Knights stepped into the plaza, Tyrion's eyes promptly snapped open. Immediately afterward, everyone present suddenly experienced a suffocating sensation. Even Southern Tiger, who stood 200 yards away, was no exception. He felt as if someone had just poured a bucket of ice-cold water onto him. Not good. Run away quickly. Southern Tiger shouted. However, by the time Southern Tiger had finished speaking, Tyrion had already teleported and appeared in front of the 2 Guardian Knights. When everyone laid eyes on Tyrion's alluring figure and enchanting eyes, they momentarily found themselves mesmerized. However, this mesmerizing feeling only lasted for a moment as everyone's attention was quickly drawn to the purple spear Tyrion had pulled out of thin air. Afterward, everyone felt as if an invisible mountain had just landed on them, their bodies becoming inexplicably heavy. "Die, intruders!" After uttering one simple sentence, Tyrion raised her spear into the air and summoned a purple light that instantly enveloped the entire plaza. Chapter 26 Sword God? We're really in trouble now. Southern Tiger inwardly sighed when he looked at the purple glow spreading out from Tyrion. Previously, he thought that Tyrion was merely a realm lord with a special bloodline, which would explain her ridiculously high HP. Meanwhile, so long as they had Feng's monodomain, the difficulty of raiding Tyrion should be no different than that of an ordinary mythic boss. However, after seeing Tyrion taking action, Southern Tiger immediately realized that he had severely underestimated the realm lord. Rather than an ordinary mythic boss, Tyrion's strength was already on par with superior mythic monsters. Even on the main continent, superior mythic monsters were incredibly challenging opponents. This was because ordinary Tier 4 MTS were incapable of surviving the attacks of a superior mythic of the same level. A Tier 4 MT would need a fragmented legendary shield at the very minimum to survive against a superior mythic. Now that their team was entirely composed of Tier 3 players, even if they had a monodomain supporting them, challenging Tyrion would still be suicidal. In fact, they wouldn't even be able to escape from Tyrion, let alone kill her. This was because every monster that reached the superior mythic rank or possessed strength rivaling superior mythics would have a monodomain. Meanwhile, in the face of a monodomain, all players below Tier 3 were nothing but ants. Players couldn't even last more than a hit within a superior mythic monster's monodomain. At this time, Southern Tiger wasn't the only person to realize the desperate situation. Moonrain and the other experts from Soulfire also fell into despair. This was because they understood that so long as Tyrion's monodomain enveloped them, only one outcome would await them: death. Yet, despite knowing this, none of them had the ability to resist. They could only watch as Tyrion's monodomain rapidly approached them. However, just when the purple glow was about to envelop the two Guardian Knights, who stood at the forefront of the team, a low shout suddenly entered everyone's ears. Halt! Immediately afterward, a grey mist rapidly spread from Shi Feng's body and collided with the expanding purple glow. Then, as if hitting an immovable wall, the purple glow came to a grinding halt. It stopped. When Southern Tiger saw the clash between purple and red happening before him, he couldn't help but turn to look at Shi Feng in surprise and confusion. Not all monodomains were equal in God's domain. Instead, the strength of monodomains varied based on the degree of control its user had over mana. Meanwhile, a superior mythic monster's monodomain was superior to even a monodomain cast by an actual Tier 4 player. This was because the quality of mana superior mythic monsters held in their body far surpassed that of Tier 4 players. Meanwhile, the greatest difference that separated Tier 4 players from Tier 3 players was the quality of the mana they possessed. It was utterly impossible for a Tier 3 player to surpass a Tier 4 player in this regard. So, logically, a Tier 3 player's monodomain should be inferior to a superior mythic's monodomain, even if said player's monodomain was a complete one. Yet, now, the monodomain Shi Feng cast had managed to fight Tyrion's monodomain to a standstill. This situation had completely shattered Southern Tiger's knowledge of monodomains. However, at this time, Southern Tiger wasn't the only one feeling surprised and confused right now. Shi Feng, who was clashing with Tyrion using his monodomain, was also surprised. Though, Shi Feng's reason for being surprised was slightly different from Southern Tiger's. What powerful mana! I didn't think her mana would have completely liquidized already. Is this the strength of a primordial archaic species? Shi Feng inwardly exclaimed as he looked at Tyrion. Thank goodness my mana body has already reached the legendary rank. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster. In God's domain, the average Tier 4 mythic monster's mana would only take on a mist-like state. Even among superior mythic monsters, only a small portion would start condensing a portion of their mana into liquid. Yet, even though Tyrion wasn't at the superior mythic rank, she already possessed liquid mana. Apart from dragons and other apex races, Shi Feng had never seen other monsters capable of such a feat. Brother Black Flame. This boss's strength has far exceeded our initial expectations. Should we retreat and discuss a countermeasure for now? Southern Tiger asked Shi Feng through the team chat. Upon hearing Southern Tiger's question, the other members of Soulfire couldn't help but be rendered speechless. For a moment, they even wondered if the Southern Tiger in front of them was the captain they knew. They were already in such a precarious situation, yet Southern Tiger was still asking for Shi Feng's opinion on whether they should retreat. Of the Soulfire members present, only Moonrain was not too surprised by Southern Tiger's actions. Though, she still couldn't help but grow anxious as she waited for Shi Feng's answer. No, that won't be necessary, Shi Feng said as he glanced at Southern Tiger. Then, he returned his gaze onto Tyrion and calmly said, Everyone, move according to plan. Not necessary? Southern Tiger was confused as he looked at Shi Feng's calm behavior. In the current situation, even a layman would understand that the raid was hopeless. Although Tyrion's monodomain was being kept in check now, the same could be said for Shi Feng's monodomain. Meanwhile, without a monodomain suppressing Tyrion, it'd be utterly impossible for their team to raid Tyrion. They simply didn't have the DPS to take her down. Continuing the raid would only lead to the team's annihilation. Shi Feng was an expert capable of casting a complete monodomain at Tier 3, so there was no way he wouldn't understand this. So, Southern Tiger couldn't understand why Shi Feng insisted they continue the raid. However, before Southern Tiger could make sense of Shi Feng's decision, he saw Shi Feng taking a step forward and instantly appearing within 100 yards of Tyrion. Then, Shi Feng unsheathed one of his long swords and gathered mana around his blade. "Break!" Shi Feng shouted as he swung his sword at the space before him. Suddenly, the grey mist that protected everyone from Tyrion's mana domain transformed into a sharp blade that slashed at the purple glow. Boom! Accompanied by the sound of an explosion, the purple glow dissipated, and the grey mist instantly enveloped Tyrion and the rest of the plaza. Subsequently, the frightening aura Tyrion radiated weakened drastically. Meanwhile, along with this unexpected development, the entire plaza fell silent as if time had stopped. Tyrion's mana domain is gone. What did Instructor Shi do? At this moment, whether it was Shi Feng's students or Soulfire's experts, everyone gaped in shock as they looked at the grey mist that dominated the plaza. Specifically, they were shocked by the sudden disappearance of Tyrion's mana domain. Everyone present had watched videos of Apex experts with mana domains clashing before. However, in these videos, even when a stronger mana domain clashed with a weaker mana domain, the weaker mana domain would only have its radius forcibly reduced. Never had they seen a mana domain completely dominating another mana domain. Yet, in a situation where his mana domain's strength was equal to Tyrion's mana domain, Shi Feng had managed to collapse Tyrion's mana domain. This situation had completely shattered everyone's understanding of mana domains. Domain transformation. He actually knows domain transformation. Southern Tiger was thunderstruck as he looked at the grey mist that dominated the plaza. Then, he turned to look at Shi Feng, a grave and confused expression appearing on his face as he muttered, "Who is he? Why is a sword god like him here? Domain transformation? Sword god?" Moonrain grew confused when he overheard Southern Tiger's mutterings. "What do you mean, Captain?" In response to Moonrain's question, Southern Tiger looked at her sternly and said, "There is no benefit in you knowing these things right now. All you need to know is that he is a sword god. Also, I need you to log off now and contact the head captain. Say that we found a nameless sword god who's not affiliated with any power." Domain transformation. This was an unfamiliar term to most players in God's domain. Even among peak experts, only a very small minority knew about domain transformation, and Southern Tiger was one of the lucky few to know about it. Simply put, domain transformation was a technique that only experts who had achieved ultimate mastery over mana could use. In God's domain, only Tier 6 God-ranked experts could touch upon the extremes of mana. To be precise, only players who have achieved ultimate mastery over mana could reach Tier 6. He's a sword god? How is this possible? Moonrain instinctively tried to refute Southern Tiger's words. After all, there should be no reason why a Tier 6 God-ranked expert would come to the miniature ancient world. However, looking at the serious expression on Southern Tiger's face, Moonrain understood that what he said should be true. So, without asking for any additional explanation, she quickly said, "I understand." After saying so, Moonrain promptly logged out of the game, ignoring the fact that she would incur a harsh penalty from doing so. Chapter 27 Realm of Gods. Why did the Vice-Captain log off? What happened to Soulfire's Vice-Captain? Is Soulfire planning to give up? The instant Moonrain logged off, everyone on the team received a notification indicating that she had logged out of the game. However, apart from Southern Tiger, everyone else couldn't help but be confused by this situation. It was especially true for Wu Lingling and the other students. Unity was crucial in a boss raid. Although Wu Lingling and the others didn't know what kind of influence Moonrain held in Soulfire's team, as the vice-team leader of Soulfire's team, her sudden disappearance definitely wouldn't benefit the team in any way. After all, Moonrain had chosen to leave the raid even at the cost of incurring the penalty for forcibly logging out of the game. This fact alone was more than enough to influence the team's mental state. If Soulfire's team were to suddenly withdraw from the raid, death would be the only outcome awaiting them. After all, Soulfire's team was the main fighting force in this raid, while their group of students was only here to act as mascots. However, before the situation could get out of hand, Southern Tiger suddenly turned to Feng and apologetically said, "I'm sorry brother Black Flame. Something urgent suddenly came up for Moon Rain, so she needed to log off immediately to deal with it. However, her absence won't affect Soulfire's performance. Moreover, to express our apology, we will help you take down the boss at all costs. Soulfire won't take any of the loot, either. Help us take down the boss at all costs? Won't take any of the loot?" Wu Lingling and the other students couldn't help but be dumbfounded when they heard Southern Tiger's words. They also felt that Southern Tiger was joking with them. While it was true that Moon Rain's absence would affect the team's performance slightly, Southern Tiger, the de facto team leader of Soulfire's team, was still present. So long as Southern Tiger was still willing to let Feng have command over the team, none of Soulfire's members would dare have any objections against Feng's leadership. They were members of a top adventurer team, after all. Even if they were dissatisfied with Feng's leadership, their honor and professional ethics prevented them from behaving excessively. However, it was a different story if Southern Tiger gave all of the boss's loot to Feng. No amount of professionalism would allow them to work for free while taking on a huge risk. Ever since God's domain became the second world for humans, many expert players had already bet their lives on God's domain. So, even ordinary experts would never work for free, let alone Soulfire's main force members, who were experts among experts. It seems this Southern Tiger isn't as simple as he seems. I didn't think he would notice. Feng was slightly surprised by Southern Tiger's actions. However, he did not show it on his face as he said, "Okay, I have no problem with that." Domain transformation was a technique that could only be accomplished by pushing the basic usage method of mana to its extremes. Meanwhile, this technique had an alias among those in the industry. Realm of Gods. The alias was used to refer to people who had reached the realm of God-ranked experts in terms of mana control. Only, the people who knew about this name and its meaning numbered incredibly few. Typically, only those with close ties to God-ranked experts would know about these things. Meanwhile, judging by Southern Tiger's behavior, it was evident that he knew something about the realm of gods. "Captain, isn't this too much? Even if we end up succeeding in this raid, we'll still end up with a loss." Many of Soulfire's members couldn't help but express their concerns when they heard Southern Tiger's decision. While Soulfire was indeed a top adventurer team, the treatment Soulfire's members received was far inferior to Guild's players. Not only did Soulfire's members not receive a basic salary, but the distribution of the items they acquired through raiding bosses was done through internal auctions. Thus, if Soulfire's members wished to earn money, they would have to place their hopes on raiding bosses, picking up personal commissions, or completing commissions assigned by the adventurer team. It could be said that over 85% of their income relied on their own decisions. The adventurer team was only there to provide them with the opportunity to make money. Meanwhile, the reason why every one of them had paid a huge price to enter the miniature ancient world was so that they could hopefully make it big here. However, if they received no payment for helping in the Tyrian raid, it would cause them to miss out on many opportunities in the miniature ancient world later on. After looking at his teammates' anxious expressions, Southern Tiger calmly explained, "You don't need to worry about this. The adventurer team will compensate for all of your losses. Even if the adventurer team doesn't compensate you, I will fully compensate you myself." "Did you lose your mind, Captain? Crap! Who is that Black Flame? Could that Black Flame be the heir of an international corporation?" The Soulfire members present placed great trust in Southern Tiger's words. Since Southern Tiger had already said he would cover their losses, everyone naturally had nothing else to say. Even so, they couldn't help but wonder about Feng's identity. After all, even when the apex experts of super guilds came to Southern Tiger to commission a job, Southern Tiger had not given them such treatment. "All right, everyone, listen to Brother Black Flame's commands. Leave your discussions for later. Southern Tiger shouted when he saw his teammates whispering incessantly. Seeing that Southern Tiger was behaving seriously, the other Soulfire members promptly halted their discussions and encircled Tyrion as planned. Meanwhile, after Tyrion tried and failed to manipulate the mana around her several times, a look of confusion appeared on her face. Evidently, she did not expect to lose control over the mana surrounding her. Even so, Tyrion didn't dwell on the matter for too long as she promptly charged toward Feng, the person standing nearest to her. Seeing this, Feng immediately commanded, "Her attack is coming. You two knights, activate your divine protection and take the hit together. Also, use Justice Roar on the boss while you're at it." "No problem." The two Guardian Knights standing behind Feng responded and stepped forward simultaneously. Then, they followed Feng's command and activated their strongest defensive skill Divine Protection as they entered a defensive stance. Not only did the skill reduce the damage they took by 60%, but it also mitigated impact forces by 90%. Meanwhile, the skill had a duration of 30 seconds and a cooldown of 5 minutes. Subsequently, when Tyrion was within 30 yards of Feng, one of the Guardian Knights started radiating a dazzling light as he let loose a deafening roar, his voice continuously echoing in Tyrion's mind and causing her intense pain. Now, Tyrion had no choice but to shift her attention to the Guardian Knight. Only by doing so would the pain subside. The next moment, Tyrion shifted her direction and charged for the two Guardian Knights instead, her spear poised to strike. Meanwhile, even without the surrounding mana amplifying Tyrion's strength, Tyrion's aura was so intimidating that the two Guardian Knights even subconsciously raised their shields a little higher than usual. Boom! Accompanied by a loud boom, a frightening shockwave spread across the battlefield. Even those standing over 100 yards away felt their bodies shaking. As for the two Guardian Knights who received Tyrion's attack together, they stumbled 3 steps backward before they managed to stabilize their bodies. Their HPs had also fallen by more than 50%. They blocked it. Everyone widened their eyes in shock when they saw that the two Guardian Knights were still alive. Soulfire's various experts were especially dumbfounded. As veteran players in God's domain, they had challenged many powerful bosses before. So, they could tell just how powerful Tyrion was when they felt her aura. The Realm Lord definitely wasn't an existence Tier 3 players could contend against. Even if Tyrion was incapable of using her mana domain right now, she was still much stronger than the average mythic boss. Yet, the two Guardian Knights had stopped her attack. It's doable. This damage is well within the tolerance of our healers. Quick! Heal those two back up. The boss is getting ready for another attack. When Soulfire's members saw that their two teammates' arms were only trembling slightly after receiving Tyrion's attack, they immediately grew ecstatic. In fact, they felt even more excited right now than when they saw Feng shattering Tyrion's mana domain. Meanwhile, out of everyone present, only Feng had reacted calmly to this outcome. What made Realm Lords powerful wasn't their above-average basic attributes. Instead, it was their ability to manipulate their surrounding mana to elevate the destructive power of their attacks. Now that Tyrion had lost that ability, even if she was a primordial archaic species, she was only slightly stronger than the average mythic boss. After all, unlike a true fallen angel, Tyrion did not possess extraordinary combat standards. If a Tier 3 MT was fully clad in custom-made epic equipment, tanking Tyrion's attacks would be no problem at all. Not to mention, Soulfire's MTS were frontline experts with high combat standards. Some of them were even refinement realm experts. So, relying on techniques to mitigate a portion of a mythic boss's damage was child's play for them. Everyone, start attacking the boss with everything you've got. Feng shouted when he saw that the two Guardian Knights had thoroughly secured Tyrion's aggro. Second party, get ready to step in as soon as divine protection is over. Everyone on the team had long since grown restless from watching. So, upon hearing Feng's command, they promptly started bombarding Tyrion with all sorts of attacks. Tier 3 Spell, Flame Explosion. Tier 3 Skill, Anti-Magic Slash. Tier 3 Skill, Storm Arrow. Tier 3 skills and spells bombarded Tyrion one after another. Even though Tyrion had dodged and blocked a portion of the attacks, she still took over 100 attacks to her body. Meanwhile, without her monodomain to weaken the attacks, damages in the hundreds of thousands started appearing above her head one after another. The boss's HP is falling. Quick! Everyone, increase your attacks! Someone shouted when they noticed Tyrion's HP falling gradually. Faced against the attacks of nearly 200 players, even Tyrion's battle recovery could not mitigate the damage she received. There's a chance. At this rate, we'll definitely be able to down the boss. Everyone grew even more excited when they saw Tyrion's HP falling steadily. The rotation of 9 tank parties plus Southern Tiger, who was capable of tanking Tyrion's attacks all by himself, created a perfect defensive cycle as every MT had sufficient downtime to wait for their defensive skills to come off cooldown. Meanwhile, thanks to this perfect defensive cycle, everyone else on the team could focus solely on attacking. So long as no accidents happened, it would only be a matter of time before Tyrion fell. Initially, everyone had merely thought that they had a chance at taking down Tyrion. However, after the raid continued for some time, everyone already understood that they had a high likelihood of killing Tyrion, the Realm Lord of the Withered Ruins. Meanwhile, if that happened, they would become the first team to successfully raid a Hell Mode Regional Dungeons boss in the miniature ancient world. It should be known that this was the first kill of a Hell Mode Regional Dungeon. This achievement would get their names recorded on the totem outside the dungeon. Subsequently, as time passed, little by little, everyone on the team also grew more and more excited. After more than 4 hours of continuous combat, everyone was already reduced to a haggard state. Among Shi Feng's students, Wu Lingling's complexion even looked a little pale. Yet, despite this being the case, there was not the slightest sign of sluggishness in her movements. On the contrary, her movements had become even more fluid as she continuously simplified and stripped away her superfluous movements. The power of her skills also grew more and more powerful. Interesting. Shi Feng also noticed the change in Wu Lingling's skills, and he couldn't help but be surprised. She's only half a step away from reaching the Truth Realm? However, Shi Feng didn't pay too much attention to Wu Lingling's improvement. Quickly, he returned his attention to Tyrion. Eventually, after nearly 5 hours of continuous battle, Tyrion finally collapsed under everyone's bombardment, her HP falling to 0. Chapter 28 God's First Appearance. As Tyrion's unreconciled scream faded from the plaza, silence suddenly enveloped the entire battlefield. Is she dead? Did we do it? Whether it was Shi Feng's students or Soulfire's members, everyone looked at Tyrion's motionless body on the ground, anticipation and apprehension filling their hearts. After hours of continuous combat, everyone had long since grown exhausted. They were merely holding on by virtue of their willpower. Meanwhile, as the boss of a Hell Mode regional dungeon, a Realm Lord, and a mythic-ranked primordial archaic species, there was no way Tyrion would fall so easily no matter how they looked at it. Not to mention, it wasn't unprecedented for powerful bosses to resurrect with full health after death. Many teams had suffered huge losses because they did not expect the bosses they raided to have such an ability. Thus, even if a boss in God's domain died, one couldn't simply write it off as dead. At this time, one of Soulfire's team leaders asked Southern Captain, "Captain, this boss should be fully dead, right?" As soon as this party leader posed his question, many of the other Soulfire members around him turned to look at Southern Tiger with curious gazes as well. Although they were all main force members of Soulfire, they were merely the adventurer team's 11th main force that Southern Tiger managed. When it came to raiding powerful bosses, they weren't as experienced as Southern Tiger. This was because Southern Tiger would often follow Soulfire's head captain on hunts for Tier 5 bosses. He had even fought against a Tier 5 dragon before. Met with everyone's expectant gazes, Southern Tiger was momentarily at a loss for words. Just as he was opening his mouth to say something, he suddenly closed his mouth again, a heavy expression appearing on his face as he noticed cracks appearing on Tyrion's body. Immediately afterward, streaks of dazzling purple light escaped from these cracks. Additionally, as the cracks on Tyrion's body increased in size and number, an indescribably powerful aura also spread out from Tyrion's body. This new aura was magnitudes stronger than Tyrion's original aura, and everyone felt as if they had just been put into a solid block of steel, their bodies becoming immobilized. No way! She really resurrected. This is cheating. How are we even supposed to beat her? Qin Wuchen and the others couldn't help but be dumbfounded by this situation. Even Wu Lingling, who had the toughest spirit out of Shi Feng's students, couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile in this situation. With everyone's present conditions, they couldn't even beat Tyrion in her original state, let alone her strengthened state. Is this a primordial archaic species ability? At this time, even Shi Feng couldn't help but frown as he looked at Tyrion hovering in the air. Although he could still use his monodomain to suppress Tyrion, over half of the team already had their concentration pushed to their limits. Apart from stamina, the other hidden attribute that restricted players' bodies was concentration. If players had their concentration reduced to a certain level, even if they still had plenty of stamina to spare, they would still lose control over their bodies, becoming unable to lift even a finger. However, just when Shi Feng was pondering whether they should retreat, Tyrion suddenly exploded into a dazzling brilliance that enveloped the entire plaza, nay, the entire city. Despite the sky being dimly lit just a moment ago, it had now become as bright as day. A moment later, a dazzling figure had walked out of the epicenter of the light explosion. Then, a staircase made of light formed under this person's feet, and this person slowly walked down to the plaza. Meanwhile, this person was none other than Tyrion. Only, at this time, her wings had already disappeared. Moreover, her expression was no longer the same as before. Rather than anger, her face now depicted indifference, her eyes containing neither joy nor sorrow. With each step Tyrion took down the staircase, everyone on the plaza could feel the pressure on their bodies increasing. By the time Tyrion had stepped onto the plaza, the intensity of her aura had also reached its peak, causing everyone but Shi Feng and Southern Tiger to involuntarily collapse onto the ground. Divine might! How is this possible? Southern Tiger's eyes were filled with incredulity as he looked at Tyrion, his body doing its best to resist the mental pressure exerted by her frightening aura. Divine might! It was a name given to the auras radiated by gods in God's domain. It was an aura capable of making all creatures beneath Tier 6 submit and grow fearful. At this time, let alone Southern Tiger, even Shi Feng couldn't help but be shocked. He never thought that the mythic-ranked Tyrion would be a Tier 6 god. Tier 6 gods were existences standing at the absolute apex of God's domain. Even a Tier 6 god-ranked expert would have no choice but to flee if they faced a Tier 6 god in a one-on-one situation. At least a group of Tier 6 god-ranked experts would be needed to contend against such an existence. Meanwhile, such an existence had actually appeared in the miniature ancient world. Moreover, the location of her advent was merely a level 100 regional dungeon. As for the people on the ground, they, too, wore dumbfounded expressions on their faces. Although they couldn't move their bodies right now, they possessed a certain degree of understanding toward divine might. Moreover, seeing as Tyrion had managed to suppress them to such an extent using her aura alone proved that she could only be a Tier 6 god and nothing else. A god. An actual Tier 6 god. Am I dreaming? Shock was the only thing present in everyone's minds right now as they looked at Tyrion. They were so shocked that even their previous despair and helplessness had disappeared. Tier 6 gods were practically myths in God's domain. Most players could only see a Tier 6 god through the videos recorded by some Tier 6 god-ranked experts. Meanwhile, every time a Tier 6 god appeared would also result in a great upheaval in God's domain. This was because apart from representing the apex of strength in God's domain, gods also represented the biggest opportunity players could find. However, among the fallen crowd, one person paid less attention to Tyrion and paid more attention to Feng. Meanwhile, this person was none other than Wu Lingling. Who exactly is Instructor Shi? Confusion and curiosity filled Wu Lingling as she looked at Feng, who remained unperturbed in front of Tyrion. Logically, a Tier 6 God's Divine Might shouldn't be something Tier 3 players could withstand. Although resisting a God's Divine Might mainly depended on one's willpower, basic attributes still played an important role. Meanwhile, even a famous expert like Southern Tiger was barely keeping himself on his feet. Yet, Feng, whose basic attributes were vastly inferior to Southern Tiger, remained in his normal state. While Wu Lingling tried to make sense of Feng's composure, Tyrion also looked toward Feng, a hint of surprise appearing on her face. Interesting, Tyrion whispered under her breath, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. Then she softly said to everyone present, "I didn't think you mortals would dare trespass here and even defeat my doppelganger. Normally, I would have bequeathed you with eternal death, but I will spare you as an acknowledgement of your glory as the victors. You can also take this treasure chest as a reward for your efforts. However, should you step into this place again, you will be turned into dust forever." After saying so, Tyrion gently waved her hand, summoning a gigantic spatial rift above the plaza. Immediately afterward, a powerful suction force pulled everyone into the spatial rift, removing them from the plaza. Meanwhile, after Feng and the others had disappeared, Tyrion looked up into the sky. Specifically, she was looking at the place beyond the sky. "Has the time finally come?" Tyrion silently whispered a sentence before disappearing from the plaza as well. At the same time as Tyrion vanished from the plaza, the outside of the withered ruins had also exploded with commotion. Chapter 29 Primordial Object. What's going on? Why did we suddenly get teleported out of the dungeon? Quick, look! The dungeon's entrance is sealed. The players who had been inexplicably teleported out of the withered ruins were agitated by the situation before them, their hearts filled with questions. A regional dungeon's entrance suddenly got sealed? Did someone trigger a major event inside? That's most likely the case. This is a Hell Mode regional dungeon we are talking about, after all. Unless a major event occurs, there's no way it would get sealed all of a sudden. Moreover, this seal is actually composed of a fourfold magic array. Anyone capable of constructing such a seal should be a Tier 5 NPC at the very least. An opportunity. This is definitely a big opportunity. Quick! Notify the higher UPS and have them send over some experts proficient in magic arrays. There must be a big secret inside the dungeon. Our guild must be the first to decode this fourfold magic array. After a brief moment of agitation and confusion, the leaders of the various teams present promptly reported this abrupt development back to their respective powers executives, their eyes filled with joy and madness. Even on the main continent, there had never been a case where an entire Hell Mode regional dungeon had been sealed, and the players within it teleported out. The only explanation for this unprecedented situation was that an unknown event had taken place inside the dungeon. Meanwhile, an event that involved a Tier 5 NPC was something even super guilds would take seriously. After all, such events would typically benefit players in getting promoted to Tier 5. Depending on the Tier 5 NPC involved, the event might even be helpful in reaching Tier 6. It should be known that even the addition of one Tier 5 expert could influence the power structure of a huge region, let alone a Tier 6 God-ranked expert. Should a new Tier 6 God-ranked expert appear, it would change God's domain's power structure in its entirety. However, unlike the other teams going crazy over this unexpected development, Soulfire's team, which was similarly teleported out of the dungeon, remained strangely calm. The several party leaders of Soulfire's team weren't even paying attention to the seal on the dungeon like everyone else. Instead, they looked toward their captain, Southern Tiger. Then, they looked toward Feng, who stood a short distance away, their eyes filled with greed and excitement. Should we take them down, Captain? A robust youth carrying a great sword on his back asked Southern Tiger in a whisper. Upon hearing this youth's words, the other party leaders also looked toward Southern Tiger, their eyes tinted with bloodlust and madness. The outsiders present might not be aware of the situation, but they knew what had exactly happened inside the withered ruins. Meanwhile, a Tier 6 God's advent was a massive event that had only happened a handful of times in God's domain. The previous instances of these events happening had even sparked wars between several dozen guilds. Moreover, even the weakest among these participating guilds was a top-ranking first-rate guild. An adventurer team like Soulfire didn't even have the qualifications to participate in those wars. Yet, now, such an opportunity had presented itself before them. Moreover, they were the only ones who knew about the event. Most importantly, the treasure chest they had acquired through this event was currently in the hands of the team leader, that is, Feng. A treasure chest bestowed by a Tier 6 god. Although the treasure chest was currently in Feng's possession, so long as they killed Feng within 2 hours, the treasure chest would drop with 100% certainty. They could take the treasure chest for their own. However, when Southern Tiger heard his subordinate's suggestion, he only hesitated for a moment before determinedly saying, "No. We cannot do such a thing." "Why?" "That's right, Captain." "Why not?" "That's a treasure chest bestowed by a Tier 6 god. We might be able to get an extra Tier 5 powerhouse if we have it. Even producing a Tier 6 god-ranked expert isn't out of the question. We might not get another opportunity like this if we miss out on it now." When the many party leaders present saw Southern Tiger's determined attitude, they couldn't help but start questioning him. While they recognized that Feng was a powerful expert worthy of Soulfire to befriend, the current situation involved Soulfire's future. If Soulfire could produce an extra Tier 5 expert through this opportunity, it wouldn't matter even if they lost Feng's friendship. However, when Southern Tiger saw his party leader's manic expressions, he took a deep breath and solemnly said, "You don't need to know the reason. All you need to know is that he is worth it. He's worth it." Southern Tiger's words stumped everyone. They failed to understand why Southern Tiger placed such high hopes on Feng, so much so that he was willing to sacrifice Soulfire's opportunity to further develop itself. Seeing everyone's confusion, Southern Tiger merely responded with a bitter smile. A Tier 6 god-ranked expert was not an existence Soulfire could afford to offend. Moreover, this was even a Tier 6 god-ranked expert that nobody had ever heard about. There must be a lot of issues involved in this matter. Meanwhile, Soulfire definitely couldn't afford to get involved in these issues. Thus, it was best that only a few people learned about Feng's identity. This was also why he had tasked Moonrain with logging off and contacting the head captain. If this matter wasn't handled properly, it wouldn't even be strange for Soulfire to disappear from God's domain. This wouldn't be the first time such a thing had happened in God's domain, either. Meanwhile, what he needed to do now was to wait for the head captain's feedback. After all, matters concerning an unknown Tier 6 god-ranked expert were already outside his authority as a captain to decide upon. At the same time as Southern Tiger made his decision to maintain friendly relations with Feng's students couldn't help but grow anxious and fearful. It was especially true when they saw the bloodlust in the eyes of Soulfire's members. "Instructor we should hurry up and leave. I keep getting the feeling that these people are looking at us strangely," Xiao Yuheng, who had a straightforward personality, suggested to Feng when she saw Soulfire's party leaders discussing something with Southern Tiger. Qin Wuchen and the others also nodded their heads in agreement. Anyone who said that they weren't tempted by a Tier 6 god's treasure chest would definitely be lying. Just when Qin Wuchen and the others thought to further persuade Feng into fleeing, Southern Tiger also started making his way over. Seeing this, Qin Wuchen and the other students immediately grew nervous. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, Southern Tiger did not come to demand the treasure chest from Feng. Instead, he approached Feng with a friendly smile and retrieved a golden token from his bag. Then, he sincerely said, "Now that we have fulfilled our agreement, we will be taking our leave, Brother Black Flame. This is Soul Fire's gold order. If you meet with any troubles in the future, feel free to seek our help using this gold order. Soul Fire will accept any request you make." Soul Fire's gold order. How can this be? When Wu Lingling, who similarly remained on high alert against Southern Tiger, saw the golden token Southern Tiger took out, astonishment immediately colored her face. Meanwhile, when Qin Wuchen and the others overheard Wu Lingling's quiet exclamation, they asked Wu Lingling in a whisper, "What are you so surprised about, class rep? What's this gold order? Is it something incredible?" Incredible? Wu Lingling couldn't help but roll her eyes when she heard her classmates' questions. There are 3 kinds of orders in Soul Fire: bronze, silver, and gold. If you have these orders, you can ask Soul Fire to help you out with one matter for free. Depending on the order's rank, the things you can ask for help on will be limited. Meanwhile, the gold order is the highest ranked order, and it is also known as the Order of No Regrets. With a gold order, you can ask Soul Fire to help you with anything, and Soul Fire will get it done or die trying. However, each captain in Soul Fire will only ever receive one gold order, which means they can only ever give it to one person. So, how incredible do you think the gold order is? Wu Lingling had only managed to hear about Soul Fire's gold order because her elder sister had mentioned it to her in passing. At the time, Soul Fire had ended up offending a superpower because of a gold order, nearly facing destruction as a result. The matter had only settled after an expert from Midnight Tea Party had stepped forward to resolve the issue. It was also after this gold order incident that Soul Fire had gradually become famous in God's domain. Originally, Wu Lingling had only thought it was a story and nothing more. Never did she think that the gold order existed. Meanwhile, after Qin Wuchen and the others learned about Soul Fire's gold order, shock immediately filled their eyes when they looked at the gold token in Southern Tiger's hand. This was a token capable of influencing Soul Fire's continued existence. Yet, Southern Tiger was now giving it to their instructor. This was simply unbelievable. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, Feng did not accept the golden token. Instead, he shook his head and calmly said, "It's fine. I don't need this thing." This Southern Tiger couldn't help but feel a little awkward when he heard Feng's answer. As for Qin Wuchen and the others, they immediately gaped in shock. The Gold Order was capable of ordering Soul Fire, an adventurer team that rivaled first-rate guilds, to do anything. Yet, Feng had refused it without hesitation. "If you want to give it away, give it to my student here." Noticing the awkwardness on Southern Tiger's face, Feng pointed at Wu Lingling and said, "She should be needing this token more than I do right now." "Me?" Wu Lingling was momentarily dumbfounded. When Southern Tiger heard Feng's words, he did not hesitate for even a moment as he handed the gold order to Wu Lingling. He even very kindly said, "This token is yours now, young lady. If you need help with anything, feel free to find us at any time. So long as it is something Soul Fire can help with, we will definitely get it done for you." After saying so, Southern Tiger promptly walked away and left the withered ruins with his team. He gave no time for Wu Lingling to react at all. Having a hard time processing this situation, Wu Lingling looked toward Feng and asked, "Instructor Shi? What should I do with this token?" While the Gold Order's benefits were immense, it was also a significant favor. It definitely wouldn't be easy for her to return such a favor. "Just take it. This is your reward for winning the championship in the freshman competition," Feng nonchalantly said. "If you need any legacies or opportunities to enter secret lands to improve your combat standard, you can ask for their help using this token. With Soul Fire's strength, they should be able to accomplish these things." When Feng finished speaking, Qin Wuchen and the others couldn't help but look at Wu Lingling in shock and envy. None of them had thought that Feng would use something as valuable as the Gold Order as a prize for winning the freshman competition. It should be known that the Gold Order was akin to a free pass to obtaining legacies for rare combat techniques and hidden classes. Even the various superpowers wouldn't casually bestow such a benefit to their young talents. After all, acquiring these legacies required significant manpower and resources. Moreover, such rare legacies were typically limited in number. Thus, only talents deemed worthy could receive these legacies for free. Meanwhile, after Soulfire's team left, Feng also had his students log out and rest for the day. The long raid had taken a toll on everyone's mind. Under such a state, they couldn't fight as efficiently as they normally did. Rather than waste time grinding inefficiently, it'd be better if they got some rest. After seeing all of his students logging off, Feng took out a return scroll and teleported back to 100 Flow City. However, Feng did not hurry in opening Tyrion's treasure chest after returning to the city. Instead, he visited the biggest hotel available in the city and rented the most expensive VIP room, which cost 20 gold per day. That was equivalent to 2 or 3 days' worth of income for a frontline Tier 3 expert. Meanwhile, only after entering the room and activating the room's defensive magic array did Feng retrieve the treasure chest out of his bag. The treasure chest was colored purple and gold. Previously, the seal placed on the treasure chest had prevented Feng from seeing it clearly, but now that the seal was gone, he noticed black electric arcs appearing around the treasure chest from time to time. It looked as if even the surrounding space rejected the treasure chest's existence. Interesting. A flash of excitement appeared in Feng's eyes when he saw this phenomenon. I thought it was merely an ordinary purple magic crystal treasure chest at first, but to think that it holds an outer world object in it. In God's domain, there were also special treasure chests apart from the standard treasure chests, such as the purple magic crystal treasure chest. These special treasure chests weren't part of the standard ranking system for treasure chests since they originated from a distant era. Their value could also vary significantly, with some being comparable to merely bronze treasure chests and some surpassing even inferior legendary treasure chests. However, any item that the world actively suppressed was undoubtedly priceless. When Feng opened the treasure chest, a black glow immediately escaped from the treasure chest. Not only did this black glow give off a chilling sensation, but it even caused the space in the room to crack and tremble. This intense reaction naturally triggered the room's defensive magic array. In the blink of an eye, a threefold defensive magic array appeared and stabilized the space inside the room. The cracks in space had also quickly mended and vanished. However, the chilling aura coming out of the treasure chest did not weaken at the slightest, making it difficult for anyone to approach it. This situation continued for 3 seconds before an ink-black longsword and a grey key surrounded by a spatial tear slowly hovered out of the treasure chest. Meanwhile, upon sensing the ancient aura these two items exuded, even Feng couldn't help but gasp. Primordial Objects. Chapter 30 Final Creation. Feng was momentarily stunned as he looked at the icy-cold longsword and grey key hovering before him, his mind having a hard time accepting this situation. In the present God's domain, the number of people who knew about primordial objects probably did not exceed 10. Items of this level could only be found outside the world of God's domain or ruins of ancient gods. This was because God's domain had been split into countless fragments during the Great Ancient War. The current main continent that most players roamed on was merely one part of the true God's domain. The miniature ancient world he currently resided in was once a part of the main continent of God's domain as well. Not to mention, even legendary items would be damaged and disappear under the erosion of time. Thus, primordial objects were incredibly rare in the present era, so rare that they could rival the rarity of eternal items. Feng knew about primordial objects because he came across one while participating in an auction in an outer world, another world's God's domain. The primordial object he saw was a severely damaged breastplate, and it was utterly unusable at the time. However, the materials used to craft the breastplate were stronger than even the materials used to craft modern divine artifacts. So, although the breastplate was no longer usable, it could be melted to produce a new weapon or equipment. At the time, many Outer World God-ranked experts had fought to acquire this breastplate. Eventually, a Tier 6 Berserker God had won the breastplate after paying a steep price of 4 legendary items. Then, he had a famed smith craft him a new breastplate. Meanwhile, the quality of the breastplate had exceeded the legendary rank, becoming the first fragmented divine artifact ranked equipment usable by players. Indeed, a fragmented divine artifact. It was an item that had reached the step above legendary. It was also an item that many god-ranked experts had once thought that players couldn't use. Even Feng was under the same assumption that that was the case. After all, he had seen even divine artifacts before, let alone fragmented divine artifacts. In fact, any player who had reached Tier 5 would have probably seen a divine artifact or two at some point. This was because there were 2 divine artifacts displayed in the War God's Temple's treasury, Meteor Glow and Frost Heaven. Meteor Glow was a staff, and Frost Heaven was a spear. Both were the best items the War God's Temple had to offer. Initially, Feng had thought that the War God's Temple was only showing off those items to players due to their absurdly expensive price tags. However, after that Tier 6 Berserker God had worn a fragmented divine artifact, everyone finally understood that players, too, could use divine artifact ranked weapons and equipment. It was also because of that fragmented divine artifact that the Berserker God who owned it became publicly acknowledged as the #1 Berserker God across multiple worlds, and no other Berserker God could ever hope to be a match for him. Meanwhile, not only did the purple crystal treasure chest in front of him contain 2 primordial objects, but both items were complete and usable. How could Feng not be surprised and shocked by this situation? It should be known that whether it was in this god's domain or other gods' domains, none of the primordial objects he had heard about had ever been a complete item. Thinking up to this point, Feng quickly suppressed the excitement in his heart and retrieved the 2 primordial objects in front of him. Then, he opened their attribute panels, eager to see what they were like. Final creation. Feng was momentarily stunned when he saw the icy longsword's information. Winter of Eternal Night, one-handed sword, fragmented legendary rank. Equipment requirement, strength 5000, tier 3. Attack power, 260% of strength. Attack speed, 3% of agility. All attributes, increases according to the user's level. When equipped, attacks gain the extreme frost effect, inflicting the freezing effect within a 10*25 yard area of the attack. Attacks have a 30% chance to deal 400% damage and weaken the effectiveness of all mana defenses by 40%. Strength increased by 6%, agility increased by 70%, intelligence increased by 20%, endurance increased by 60%, attack speed increased by 40%. Ignore levels plus 50. Effect of all sword type skills improved by 50%. Power of all sword type skills increased by 1 rank. Effect of mana increased by 50%. Additional passive skill, Winter's Body. Winter of Eternal Night will absorb its user's mana to strengthen its user's physique. The higher the mana's quality, the greater the improvements. Improvement limited at 100%. Additional active skill 1, Radiant Night, Tier 4. Adds the power of erosion to all of the user's attacks and forcibly increases the rank of the user's attacks by 2, up to Tier 5 Intermediate. Duration, 20 seconds. Cooldown, 1 hour. Additional active skill 2, World of Frost, Tier 4. Casts the shadow of a world around the user, enveloping an area of a 500-yard radius. The user may summon up to 9 frost swords within the enveloped area. Each frost sword will carry 120% of the user's strength. Duration, 3 minutes. Cooldown, 2 hours. Additional Profound Inheritance 1, Formless Sword. Converts heaven and earth into a temporary sword. The quality of the sword created depends on the surrounding environment and the magic array constructed by the user. Duration, 1 hour. Cooldown, 1 natural day. Additional Profound Inheritance 2, World Sword. Devour world sources to evolve. The ancient god of thunder's final creation. Winter of eternal night holds the power source of an ancient god, and it is capable of freezing all things. Feng wasn't a stranger to the ancient god of thunder. This was because the creator of the Solomon's sword he used in his previous life was none other than the ancient god of thunder. Meanwhile, Solomon's sword was also considered one of God's domain's 10 great legendary weapons. The sword that I failed to find in my last life, I didn't think it would be here. It's no wonder why I couldn't find it no matter how much I searched the main continent. Feng couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile as he looked at the pitch-black longsword in his hand. As one of the oldest ancient gods, the ancient god of thunder had created many swords during his existence. Among them, the most famous one was none other than Solomon's sword. However, few people knew that Solomon's sword wasn't a completed product but a half-finished product instead. The reason for that was that nobody had ever managed to gather all of the necessary fragments, not even Feng. After Feng had acquired Solomon's sword and used it for some time, he realized that the weapon was actually missing half of its power source. Meanwhile, after doing some research, he discovered that the remaining half was inside the ancient god of thunder's final creation. Yet, now that Solomon's sword was no longer in his possession, he had obtained the final creation instead. However, after ruing over this ironic situation for a moment, Feng wiped his bitter smile away and stored the winter of eternal night away. Although Solomon's sword's fragments were currently scattered across God's domain right now, it was still a good start to have the winter of eternal night. Subsequently, Feng shifted his attention onto the grey key, his expression growing stern. Not only did this grey key not originate from his current sub-world, but it was even an item from the main world of God's domain. Although he was missing a significant portion of his memories right now, he still vividly remembered that any item from the main world would pose extreme danger to a sub-world. He had heard of one instance where a main world item had caused the disappearance of an entire sub-world in the past. Moreover, every Tier 6 God-ranked expert that couldn't hold back their curiosity and tried to look into this matter had fallen. It should be known that Feng wasn't a Tier 6 sword god right now. He was merely a Tier 3 sword king who had practically nothing to his name. If a problem occurred due to this grey key, he would be utterly powerless to salvage the situation. Meanwhile, the grey key had a very simple function. So long as one could perfectly solidify mana, one could activate the key and travel between the many worlds of God's domain. While this function might not seem like much, if any super guild learned of it, they would probably lose their minds over it. They wouldn't even hesitate to start a war against every power in God's domain so long as they could acquire this grey key. At this point, the various super guilds should have already learned that there wasn't just one God's domain in existence, but many instead. They should have also learned about the main world and its importance. Unfortunately, entering the main world and securing a foothold wasn't an easy task. It was an endeavor that required a large number of God-ranked experts. However, producing a God-ranked expert was easier said than done. Not only did it require an astronomical amount of resources, but it also required a large number of opportunities and legacies. Meanwhile, a single subworld's limited resources and opportunities were only enough to facilitate the birth of a limited number of Tier 6 God-ranked experts. If a subworld wanted to produce more God-ranked experts, it would have to plunder resources and opportunities from other subworlds. However, entering other subworlds was a difficult feat even for God-ranked experts. Normally, only when a world passage appeared could the players of two subworlds freely travel to each other's world. Although other means were available for players to travel between subworlds, achieving success with these means was unimaginably difficult. Moreover, even if players got lucky and crossed worlds, they would still have to deal with the foreign world's suppression. In the end, they wouldn't be able to accomplish anything meaningful. However, it was a different story for the Grey Key before him. Not only did it allow him to open passages to other subworlds, but it also allowed him to avoid facing any suppression from the foreign subworlds. This Grey Key was essentially a free pass to the many subworlds of God's domain. Even describing this key as heaven-defying would be an understatement. Whatever. I can only take things one step at a time right now. After taking a long look at the key in his hand, Feng stored it in his bag and chose to log off for the day. He needed to plan out how he should earn academy points. After all, what he needed to do most right now was improve his physical fitness in the real world and improve his brain's activity. If he couldn't even get his body to meet the minimum standards of getting promoted to Tier 4, there'd be no point in talking about the future. God's Domain Academy, Advanced Training Hall. Various smart training equipment was situated across the hall that was the size of a sports arena. Not only could this training equipment perfectly measure a person's physical parameters, but it could also provide personalized training solutions to allow users to train with maximum efficiency. There were also autonomous robots available for sparring purposes, and those who chose to spar with these robots could maximize the improvement of their physical fitness and combat techniques. These were all advanced technological products that ordinary training centers in the outside world couldn't purchase. Meanwhile, in addition to the academy's instructors, only a few students were present inside the training hall. This was because only the academy's instructors and students who had received A-rank evaluations on their academic performance were qualified to enter this training hall. Moreover, just spending 1 hour in this training hall would cost 2,000 credits or 2,000 academy points. It was not an expenditure that ordinary students and instructors could afford. However, at this time, most of the instructors and students present weren't actually doing any training. This was because they had their attention attracted toward the person who had just entered the hall. The person in question was a sexy girl with shoulder-length brown hair. She wore a white sports t-shirt and shorts that revealed much of her healthy wheat-colored skin. Meanwhile, as soon as this woman entered the hall, she promptly made her way toward Wu Lingling, who was going through a reaction test right now. Crap! Isn't that Senior Xiu? Why is one of the 4 heavenly kings here? I know, right? After she won in the professional league's 3rd preliminary round, I heard that she is now in line to be selected as one of the preliminaries seeded candidates. I heard that even some first-rate guilds have extended an invitation to her already. When the students in the hall saw this brown-haired girl, feelings of admiration appeared in their eyes. Many of the instructors present even cast envious gazes at this girl. Apart from Wu Xiaoxiao, the God's Domain Academy's star and a monstrous genius, the Academy also had 4 top-tier geniuses. Every one of these 4 geniuses had long since surpassed most of the Academy's instructors in terms of combat standards. If not for Wu Xiaoxiao's appearance, these 4 top-tier geniuses would have been the Academy's pride. Meanwhile, Chen Xiu, the brown-haired girl, was one of these 4 top-tier geniuses, also known as the Academy's 4 heavenly kings. However, despite Chen Xiu being such a talented beauty, few boys in the Academy dared to pursue her. Even the Academy's wealthy young masters dared not have any designs over her. This was because Chen Xiu wasn't just one of the Academy's 4 heavenly kings. At the same time, she was also senior instructor key favored student. In the future, there was a very high chance that she would join one of God's Domain super guilds. After all, Chen Xiu was currently only in her 3rd year. She still had 1 entire year to develop herself. Apart from Chen Xiu, there was also a man who had entered the hall at the same time as she did. This person was none other than Luo Tiancheng, who had come running here in a hurry after learning about Chen Xiu's visit. At this moment, though, Luo Tiancheng's dignity as a teacher was nowhere to be seen as he simply stood behind Chen Xiu like a follower while Chen Xiu waited for Wu Lingling to come out of the reaction tester. After a minute, Wu Lingling came out of the reaction tester covered in sweat. Then, when Chen Xiu saw the result displayed on the tester, she said, "Not bad, little Ling. It's been a while since I last saw you, but I didn't think your reaction standard had already reached excellent. You're outperforming even your elder sister." The reaction test results could be categorized into 5 ranks: basic, intermediate, advanced, excellent, and perfect. Even among senior students, those who received an advanced evaluation for their reaction test were the minority. As for those with perfect evaluations, they could rank among the Academy's top 30 students. It should be known that even Chen Ziyu herself had reached perfect only recently. "Why are you here, Big Sis Ziyu?" Wu Lingling asked, feeling slightly surprised when she saw Chen Ziyu. Chen Ziyu was one of her elder sister's good friends and someone akin to a second big sister. Even before she entered the God's Domain Academy, Chen Ziyu had given her a lot of pointers and helped her with training. "Of course, it is because I have business with you. Moreover, it can be considered good news for you," Chen Ziyu said, smiling. There was also a hint of envy in her voice when she spoke. "Good news?" Wu Lingling grew confused. "What good news?" Seeing the bewildered look on Wu Lingling's face, Chen Ziyu put on a formal smile and said, "My instructor, Instructor Qi, wishes for you to become his student. Moreover, so long as you become my instructor's student, not only will you get a training slot in world domination, but you will also receive one of the legacy slots Shadow acquires in the miniature ancient world."